A Ukrainian forensic team found fragments of missile amongst the wreckage of flight PS-752. That's one reason the Iranian government couldn't continue to claim mechanical error brought down the plane. They bulldozed the site, but examination of the pieces and interviews with eyewitnesses revealed the terrible truth. Thousands gathered around Azadi Square in central Tehran last night, chanting, "Shame on our stupid leaders," and "Guns, tanks and mullahs get lost." Fury about the accidental shooting of the plane and the attempted cover-up has morphed into wider protest against the Islamic State. Chaotic footage shot by protesters appears to show the security forces beating people. Here, if you look carefully, you can see one with a gun. Escaping the security forces, a woman shouts, "They fired tear gas at the protesters. Azadi Square, death to the dictator." Nearby, blood stains the pavement. A voice off camera says, "We've seen 7 people shot so far. It's all blood." Another woman screams that she's been shot in the leg, and there's more blood on the pavement. A semi-official news agency released footage of the British ambassador, who was briefly arrested after being accused of attending a protest on Saturday. He says he went to a vigil for the dead and left when the chanting began. Today, the Foreign Secretary summoned the Iranian ambassador to the UK.
Let me be very clear about this. He was not attending or recording a political protest or demonstration. His arrest later that day without grounds or explanation is a flagrant violation of international law.
None of it deterred students at Sharif University in Tehran this morning. 16 of the dead were graduates who had emigrated. "You took our best and replaced them with clerics," they chanted. A state TV anchor, Gelari Jabari, resigned, saying, "It was very hard for me to believe the killing of my countrymen. I apologize to lying to you on TV for 13 years. Many Iranians, it seems, are unconvinced by the government line.
If I want to be honest with you and give my opinion, the problem is lack of appropriate structures, whether in improvement of defense systems or in how we should tell the truth to the people. We had absolutely no intention of concealing anything from the people.
Last night, protesters tore down pictures of General Soleimani, killed by the Americans in Baghdad. Any nationalist boost to the Iranian state has been destroyed by the shooting down of a civilian aircraft and the cover-up that followed.
Well, our international editor, Lindsay Hilton, is in the Iraqi capital, Baghdad, now. Lindsay, we've seen President Trump tweeting in Farsi today, presumably hoping that the people and also the government will see it. Is it having any effect there?
Well, I think what it shows, I mean, it's the first time that President Trump has tweeted in any language other than English. It shows the policy of maximum pressure, and certainly people in authority in Iran will have seen it. It was a rather odd tweet. It said that he couldn't care less whether Iran negotiated or not and told the government not to shoot protesters. It also means that the government can say, as it always does, that these protesters are being orchestrated by the Americans. Maybe what's having more impact inside is the number of Iranian celebrities who are talking about what's going on. The only female medalist from the Olympics, she has defected. There's been a very significant actress. She has criticized the government. Quite a few people are coming out. And I think that will encourage people to stay out on the streets. You know, the Iranian government's in a very difficult position at the moment. On Thursday, the foreign ministers of what they're calling the grieving nations, Ukraine, Canada, Britain, Afghanistan, Sweden, are meeting in London. And they're going to be talking about compensation. Because now the Iranian government has admitted that it shot down this plane, it is going to have to pay compensation. And people, one of the things that they're furious about is how poor they are. And maybe one of the saddest things is all these university students who've been forced to leave Iran because there's no future for them there. That's why so many of them were on the plane going to Canada. And that is one of the things that's driving middle-class people onto the streets. Total despair that they have any future in Iran.
Lindsay, thanks very much. Matt.
Well, joining me now from Tehran is Mohammad Hashemi, a former journalist at the Tehran Times. Thanks for coming on the programme, Mohammad. Let me start off by asking you what Lindsay answered as well just now. How significant is it that you've got these, Iranian stars, whether it's the Olympic gold medalist or indeed, famous actors and news presenters saying enough is enough, we've had enough of the lies?
Well, as you know, this was a very tragic incident, and the mood now in Iran is that of grief and sadness. And there has been this wave of, let's say, fury and anger among many people about the way things have unfolded over the past days. And when these things happen, these feeling of emotions and let's say these feelings of fury comes out, I would say we would see such actions on the part of a lot of artists, on the part of sportswomen. You mentioned the case of Kimia Alizadeh and so on and so forth. So the mood is now quite emotional, and at the same time, today, since Saturday, a lot of newspapers have dedicated their front pages to this story of this tragic Ukrainian plane crash. The main squares.
Okay, but let me ask you this: how different is this then to previous demonstrations? And we saw, thousands of people on the streets of Tehran a few months ago. Those demonstrations were shut down. The internet was shut down at the time. Then, of course, in 2009, hundreds of thousands of people on the streets. How significant is this particular moment?
Well, I have talked to some of my colleagues in other cities, and I have also seen the videos that your reporter also mentioned. When I consult with my colleagues, in terms of size and diversity, the number of protesters is not that much in bigger scale. It's much smaller. It's scattered. In other cities, we do not see that much larger scale protests. And also in Tehran, you mentioned thousands, but it is very scattered, and I would say it is maybe hundreds.
But where will this lead? I mean, do you think this will fizzle out, or does it have, some kind of longevity?
Well, one thing that has been left unnoticed is that there is this upcoming parliamentary elections, and there are some political forces who want to, let's say, ride on the wave of this emotional atmosphere in order to score political points. And at the same time, there is this news coverage on the part of the opposition news channels from outside that they are hoping this protest would continue. But I would say it would fizzle out in maybe, I assume, in over a week, maybe, or less.
Okay, Mohammad Hashemi, thanks very much indeed. Kathy.
Thanks, Matt. Well, joining me now from Washington is Giselle Donnelly, who served as director of the House Armed Services Committee and is now a resident fellow at the neoconservative think tank American Enterprise Institute. Giselle Donnelly, clearly Tehran is at something of a crossroads. How can the US coax the Iranians into doing what Washington wants?
Well, I really think the best thing to do at this point is let the Iranians try to sort it out for themselves. Clearly, the embarrassment and shame, you'd have to say, over the shoot-down of the Ukrainian airliner is doing more to discredit the government in the wake of the Soleimani killing and to remind Iranians about how not only repressive that regime is, but really how barely competent they are at things like air defense.
But can Donald Trump resist the temptation to get involved? Because, you've seen him tweeting away in Farsi today.
That's a very good question. Well, he's a notable Farsi speaker, so I'm sure he's been saving this untapped linguistic power for some time. But Trump is also a constant. I mean, I don't think he can really influence either to make it better or to make it worse. And in fact, the policy of the administration, which clearly remains to use economic and sanction pressure, maximum pressure on the Iranian regime, but really to diminish the American footprint in the region is probably, at least in the near term, a path that's likely to reap some rewards. It may make our allies nervous as cats, but it will tend to undercut the Iranian regime's narrative about the great Satan coming after them.
I mean, it's interesting that you suggest that the policy is unchanged, because I just wonder what happens here. For example, I was looking at one of Donald Trump's weekend tweets where he said, the world is watching, more importantly, the USA is watching. My administration will continue to stand with you. I mean, what does that mean? Does it, for example, mean that if anti-government protesters are killed by the regime, that the US has to intervene in some way and step things up again?
No, it doesn't mean that. I mean, what's noticeable about this is that Trump has been quite silent, say, when it comes to protests in Hong Kong or elsewhere around the world. So the fact that he's actually even saying, going through the "we stand with you" rhetorical posture is a step forward for him. And so he clearly feels, I think personally, more animosity toward the Iranian regime than to others, and feels that this is a politically safe posture for him to take. He's reassured his base, which very much wants to withdraw from so-called endless wars in the Middle East, that he's not going to become embroiled in a larger conflict.
And not going to be...
So he clearly feels safe.
Not going to be tempted to pursue sort of regime change, as might have been suggested by Mike Pompeo when he's saying, the Iranian people are fed up with the regime. He's going to let them sort it out themselves.
Well, so there may be regime change by other methods. He's not going to stop pressuring the regime economically or geopolitically. And he says now he's not really interested in negotiating, so he's willing to let, particularly under the immediate circumstances, the Iranian regime sort of twist slowly in the wind. But there is zero prospect of a regime change war of the sort that is more hyperbolic critics would like to imagine.
Giselle Donnelly, thank you very much for joining us.